frustrating offseason for the Philadelphia Phillies continues on, and the maddening PR spends from the front office are beginning to leak their way out. I do want to step in and express my frustration for why things have been unacceptable to this point and why more moves still need to go down to give the fan base a legitimate hope about this team moving forward. Obviously, the Phillies have missed out on their big fish in Bo Bichette, not only not being able to sign him, but allowing him to remain within the NL East and sign with the New York Mets. And again, I have given my full feelings on this. This is not a situation where I think you can truly fault the front office. This was Bo Bichette playing the Phillies, and for that very reason, he should be an all-time Philadelphia fan base villain forever. And I am stamping him with that. Have to make an appearance to Citizens Bank Park to express my full feelings with the boo when he does make his first trip there. But nonetheless, do want to dive into what has gone down this offseason and why frustrations are reaching such a peak. And the first thing I do want to point out to, I am not tolerant of the PR spins that are beginning to leak out from the Phillies organization. And what I mean by that is things like this. And shout out to Corey Nido, who does do good work. Do like Corey. But he tweets out more from the great Jason Stark yesterday on The Fanatic regarding the notion that the Phillies weren't good enough to beat the Dodgers. Quote, "You know who doesn't think that? The Dodgers. I was around them a lot in October. Had a long talk with Dave Roberts at winter meetings. He was telling me how they felt they were lucky to beat the Phillies. They couldn't score against them. It took a couple of crazy plays that nobody focused on now for them to win." And we also are getting posts like this from shout out to Jeff Skversky, another guy who I do like, but I think is, being a little bit naive in his approach to this tweet here. And he says, Bo Bichette career stats per game versus Phillies third baseman Alec Bohm. Bichette has better numbers, but is not drastic enough to justify the massive difference in money. On top of that, the New York Mets star was one of the worst shortstops in the MLB season for the Blue Jays. And to dive in, I'll start by saying I've never really seen baseball stats be broken down on a per-game basis the way that this is, but to dive into what he posts, Bo Bichette 1.21 hits per game compared to Alec Bohm 1.05. Pretty notable gap in my mind there. Home runs, 0.15 home runs to 0.10 for Alec Bohm. Again, a pretty notable gap from an MLB standard when you factor that over a 162 game sample size. The RBIs 0.58 to 0.55. The stolen bases 0.08 to 0.03. And perhaps the most jarring one to me is Bo Bichette, a 0.028 WAR compared to a 0.007 for Alec Bohm. Now the stat WAR literally means wins above replacement. And by this metric here, Bo Bichette has a 4 times better wins above replacement than Alec Bohm. I do think that makes him a notably better baseball player by those specific standards. So I understand what Jeff is going for here for talking about Bichette being overpaid and it not being the best financial move from an organizational standpoint. But the bottom line is the Mets have Bo Bichette and the Phillies don't for that very reason. So I do want to dive deeper into that specific conversation as well as the entire outlook for this offseason. We do got to take a quick break for here from our sponsor here.
Before we get into the rest of today's show, this video is brought to you by Kalshi. If you download Kalshi using the link in the description and use code DIGESTMLB, you're going to get $20 when you trade your first 100. Kalshi is the largest prediction market in the United States, and on their platform, you can trade yes or no on real-life events such as sports, elections, news, pretty much anything. Now, whether you're in California, Texas, or anywhere across the country, Kalshi is live in all 50 states. For us sports fans, we can turn on game outcomes, playoff chances, or player performances, all on a regulated market in which you can cash out at any time. Looking at that NL East division title odds, we can see Philadelphia right there at the 32% odd on the trade yes. I think it's a really good one to make right now. We can also see the odds on their forecasted win total on Kalshi that you can trade on as well. It's genuinely the smarter way to use your sports or news knowledge, and you can close your position whenever you want. Test your ball knowledge today by downloading Kalshi with the link in the description. And again, use code DIGESTMLB to get your $20 bonus. We appreciate everybody at Kalshi for making this video possible.
Now, when looking at this team as a whole, did want to pull up this graph from Fangraphs.com that breaks down the WAR for both pitching and hitting for each MLB team, which I did think was interesting. And by this way, this is after the Bichette and JT Realmuto signings were officially announced. And you can see across the league, the total WAR that is projected for the Phillies sits at 43.9, which is 8th in the entire NBA, or an MLB there. What stood out the most to me was the batting WAR, that looking at the lineup, when you think towards the identity of what this Phillies team has been built upon for these past couple years, it is about mashing. It is about putting up runs. Now, obviously, the pitching staff has improved leaps and bounds with the emergence of guys like Christopher Sanchez, Zack Wheeler continuing to be an absolute ace, the bullpen adding guys like Johan Duran, and all the conversations we can have. But the foundation of what this team is supposed to be is a high-level offense. And when you look at just the batting WAR, they rank 16th in the MLB. That is not great for what this team is supposed to be, especially when you're investing in guys like Kyle Schwarber at the rate they did this offseason. That Bryce Harper, that you know who's not going to take any of these PR spins or isn't going to be accepted, isn't going to accept the answer that the Dodgers just paid more, that the Mets just outbid them? Bryce Harper. Bryce Harper is not, because no guy has made it clear their intentions of winning, their willingness to sacrifice, their desire to do everything to be the face of this franchise that brings a World Series to Philadelphia than Bryce Harper. I can't imagine what the conversations have been like behind the scenes. There already was the frustrations at the start of this offseason from Dave Dombrowski, sort of taking a little bit of a jab at his superstar about talking about him not being elite. Now, with all that said, I am buying stock on this being an absolute great Bryce Harper season. That I do think that he is angry in the batting cage with a not elite shirt on, things like that. I do think this is going to be an incredible season that he proves he's still got plenty in the tank, but he can't do this single-handedly. Now, when speaking about how things have gone down this offseason, the guy that really has gotten the short end of the stick the most is JT Realmuto. Not in the standpoint of him getting paid, because we did get the news that the Phillies agreed to a contract on a 3-year, $45 million deal with a chance to get $60 million. Obviously, that is great money for JT, and I personally am a guy who's a little bit more net positive on the JT Realmuto outlook. Why I say that he's kind of being set up for failure was the timing of this. Dropping this right on the back of them being unable to sign Bo Bichette is pretty brutal way to set up their catcher there. And obviously, I don't think there would have been a extreme positive reaction regardless of the circumstance. It does feel like a lot of people are sick of JT Realmuto. I certainly feel more in the positive conversation here. And to make that case, I did want to pull up a blurb from this article from Nick Pacone on Crossing Broad. Shout out to Nick Pacone, an awesome Twitter follow. And he writes, "It was clear the Phillies didn't have any sort of plan at catcher for the post-Realmuto era. So kicking the can down the road a few years made sense in that Realmuto was still a very good catcher that could probably still get the best out of this pitching staff. But having to pay him $45 million over 3 years feels like it was rewarding his past seasons. He'll be 35 when this begins, and there will be minimal expectations on offense. Meanwhile, the Dodgers once again are landing pretty much anyone they want. They signed former Mets closer Edwin Diaz, who they probably didn't even need, to a 3-year, $69 million deal in December. Then, Thursday night, they signed another prize free agent in Kyle Tucker to a ridiculous 4-year, $240 million deal with opt-outs after the second and third season. And that really is where all this frustration comes in. It's not really that the Phillies haven't done their job, although that's certainly a key part of the conversation. It's that the rich keep getting richer, man. It's the Dodgers keep spending at a level that no other team in baseball is capable or willing to do. But the Phillies have to look themselves in the mirror and figure things out. That if this is the end of the seismic move for this offseason, we might as well shift into a rebuild. That there is no world where this current iteration of this Phillies team is good enough to actually contend with the Dodgers. And there's still things that need to be done. That it's been talked about all offseason like it's a foregone conclusion that Nick Castellanos has played his last game in Philadelphia. Well, the bottom line is he's still on roster. And by the way, even if he is gone, you have to find a way to replace a guy who had 17 home runs, 72 RBIs last year, 137 hits with a .400 slugging percentage. Nick Castellanos has his flaws. He certainly is not the perfect baseball player. The plate approach is maddening. That his strikeout issues are legitimate like that. But the bottom line is this dude has shown up in the postseason for this team, and you got to find a way to replace that level while dumping the money that he still has. So not a great situation to be dealing with there. There are things that still need to be done. Are you satisfied with the bullpen? They're obviously gone a little bit of a different direction, and there's sort of theology behind it that they want these young arms with lots of years control that maybe aren't the big names that you have high expectations for, but if you can hit on multiple of these guys above what their price point is, there is value in that. And you can kind of talk me into that. Each of these conversations in a vacuum that we can have, and I can feel optimistic. Adolis Garcia, I see the vision of him as a buy low guy, and I do think he ultimately should and will outperform what Nick Castellanos gave this team last year. But can we count on Justin Crawford being an everyday player? Is Andrew Painter just going to be ready to step into the starting pitching rotation and perform at a high level? There's a lot of ifs and a lot of question marks about this specific Phillies team, and it feels pretty ugly to be at this stage of the offseason. So to Dave Dombrowski directly, I understand that some of this is not necessarily your fault, but it is impossible not to look at this offseason as a massive failure to this point. Extremely underwhelming in the outlook for improving this Phillies team. There is still time to fix that. Spring training has not arrived yet. There are still some notable names out there on the free agent market. It's time to attack those and make some things happen. I understand it is not easy, that the bids are flying everywhere, the Mets are spending, the Dodgers are spending, but the Phillies are supposed to be one of these premier teams. That they've talked about that money is not an issue. Who cares how much they spend if it comes with a trophy? John Middleton wants his trophy back. Time to walk the walk, not just talk the talk, and make some things happen. Get creative, whether that means getting in the trade market, whether that means exploring what is an Alec Bohm trade return, what is an outfield missing piece that you could potentially get find a way to get things done. That is my request for the remainder of the offseason. There has to be at least one sort of splashy move that can get people to buy back in on this Phillies team. It's unfortunate. I'm an NBA guy. I'm a Sixers guy. And it felt for so long what was maddening to me is the Sixers sort of slipped into this territory of wake me up when the playoffs are here. Then who cares what happens in the regular season? I kind of feel like the Phillies are now in that same exact territory. This is going to be a good baseball team. This is going to be a postseason team. This team is going to win a ton of regular season games. But is there real optimism for buying in why this year could be different? Right now, I found a hard time finding that level of optimism. But if you do have it, would love to hear from you guys in the comments. Maybe this is the season that they get hot at the right time, that they are able to overcome some postseason demons. Let me hear your levels of optimism in the comments, but that's how I'm feeling at this current stage of the game. So make sure you're dropping those thoughts below. Smashing to subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Drop a like on this video here. I'll be back talking to you next time right here on Phillies Digest. Peace.